Hello, in this video tutorial we're going to utilize Docify API to create a plugin to enhance Docify documentation. At the moment, static content page shows us a syntax for markdown language. Input markdown is rendered on a page followed by expected result in HTML. However, much better user experience could be achieved by rendering this in 3 tabs: input markdown, HTML, and preview. Code snippet plugin from the standard library already allows to render tabs. Unfortunately, this plugin cannot be used to solve our requirements, but we can look at the source code and use it as a basis for our plugin. This plugin forms a specific HTML and renders this to the page via include. All the necessary JavaScript and styles are automatically added with this plugin, and as this plugin is a part of user guide theme which is used by the documentation, we'll be able to reuse those styles and JavaScripts. Local site plugins in Docify must be placed into the special _plugins folder. It is required to place binaries into the separate folders which correspond to plugin name, but in this case I'm also going to manage source code within that folder. So I will create a corresponding src folder and open that in a terminal to create a new project. We'll create new .NET Core 3.1 class library project. As we need to place plugin DLLs into the direct subfolders of our _plugins folder, I'm going to add out_dir attribute to my project and specify the relative path to output my results. In this case, plugin DLL files will be placed in the markdown-syntax-previewer subfolder of plugins and will be properly recognized by Docify engine. Now let's quickly rename the name of the class and the namespace. We can now build the project to make sure it is compilable, and we can also check that the DLLs output into the correct folder. So now when I expand plugins folder, you can see there is a new subfolder and there are plugin files in there. As the source code for plugin is included within the plugins folder, we need to add it to ignore to avoid any conflicts. Let me also rename the file to match the class name. I will now go ahead and install Xarial Docify base package, which contains all of the definitions for API of Docify. To mark my class as a plugin, I need to implement iPlugin interface from the package. I will also additionally install Xarial Docify base extension package, which contains some utility functions which I'm going to use in my plugin. Now let's implement the interface. It provides a single init functions which will be called every time our plugin loads, and it passes a pointer to Docify application, which is the topmost class of our API object. This interface provides an access to various services used by Docify, such as compiler, composer, loader, logger, or publisher. You can also define custom includes which will be rendered and resolved via plugin. Docify also supports includes via writer pages. You can look another video published on this YouTube channel for more information about those type of includes. But in some cases, includes provided by Razor pages might be limited and cannot solve all the requirements. Let's register new include here. We need to specify the name and the handler function. I'm going to inspect the definition to find the signature of the function I need to define. I can just copy it here and place into my code. This function will be called by environment every time markdown snippet include needs to be resolved in a page or template. For now, I'm just going to import namespaces and also return an empty value which I'm going to compose later in the video. Finally, I need to pass a pointer to this function as a second parameter of my register custom include handler API. Let me now specify some test value for this include so we can validate that this plugin works. So for example, something like include rendered from plugin. Now we can build our project and refer this include from our page. So let me just copy the name of this include. I need to use a special syntax to reference my include in the page, and I'm just going to add this to my static page here. We can now go ahead and serve this site. To make my development easier, I'm going to open a second window terminal where I'm going to serve my site, and I will be using the left window terminal to compile my plugin. Site has been served, so we can open URL and make sure that our include is rendered properly. And as you can see, there is an include text rendered here. To make things easier to manage, I'm planning to include each individual section of this page into the separate markdown file. Those snippets will be placed next to page itself, and plugin will load those snippets and create 3 tabs from them, one for markdown, one for corresponding HTML, and a preview. Let me now copy the markdown for headings, and I'm just going to create the corresponding snippet file. I will be using md_ extension instead of md to avoid this file to be recognized as a page, but instead it should be recognized as an asset. I can now place markdown in this file and save it. I can now replace the inline snippets in my page with the corresponding include. I will also pass the name of an asset as a name attribute for the metadata of my include. Now in the plugin I can access the value of that parameter and find the corresponding asset from a page. I will be using as_text_content to get the text content of my asset. To convert this markdown into HTML, I'm just going to call the corresponding compiler API. Now the value in HTML variable will contain the actual HTML generated for that markdown, and I will be able to use it in the preview tab of my documentation. And now we need to generate the code for another 2 tabs, markdown and HTML. Static Content Transformer transform API using exact same function as an engine itself to transform markdown into HTML. It means it also runs the code through all the plugins installed in Docify engine. So if I want to generate the code for my markdown and HTML to be as is rather than rendered HTML, I will need to fence it in the corresponding code tags. For HTML tab, I will fence the value of HTML variable with 3 apostrophes and the code for HTML language. I will repeat similar steps for my markdown tab. Now I'll create string builder variable where I'm going to use it to form my HTML. I will need to define the unique ID of my tab, which I'm just going to use the name of the file plus -tab. I will fast forward the video, and this is our final result. Essentially, I will just generate this HTML here. Let's now see how it works. I'm now going to show you how you can debug that plugin. At first, I will add system diagnostic debugger launch function to stop our process on initiation. Now we can build the project and generate debug configuration for .NET Core. Now we can serve the site and attach to the process to debug our plugin. Launch window of debugger has popped up, and now we can use netcore attach to attach to Docify process. Just select Docify process from the list, place breakpoint in the code, and close the debug launch window. Debugger now hit our breakpoint, so we can continue and place another breakpoint on onResolve markdown snippet, which is going to be called when snippet needs to be resolved. Breakpoint has been hit, so we can inspect our code. At first we extract the name of the asset from our attributes. Now we're finding the corresponding asset, extracting its text, which is going to be equal to our markdown. Now we're transforming that markdown into HTML, and we're also forming 2 tabs for code, HTML and markdown, and now we are forming the HTML for our tabs. So this is the final result, which is going to be placed instead of an include on our page. Let's continue execution. As we only have single page, we're not going to hit that breakpoint again. Now let's open HTML page in our browser and see the result. I'm going to content static, and you can see now our headings markdown has been rendered in 3 tabs. If I open the site output folder, I can notice that my snippet is also placed as an output. This is the default behavior. All assets are published into the output directory as well. And this is not a desired behavior for our plugin. To avoid this, we can use a publishing API which allows us to exclude the files based on certain condition. Each entity used by Docify has an ID, so we can simply create a list where we're going to collect the IDs of our assets and then exclude them based on an ID. I will create an instance of this list from init function, and I'm going to fill it from my onResolve markdown snippet. As a next step, I will need to handle pre-publish file event from publisher service API. I'm going to inspect the definition of that interface to copy the signature of the event handler function and add it to my code. In Visual Studio you will be just able to hit tab to generate that code automatically, but in Visual Studio Code you need to do this manually. This event handler contains arguments, and one of the parameters of that argument is whether we want to skip the specific file. Now I can simply check if the ID of the currently publishing file is contained within my snippet's IDs list. If so, it means that this file is my snippet and needs to be excluded. So I'm just going to set skip file property to true. Let's serve the site and make sure that the snippet file is not published to the output directory. And as you can see, there is no snippet file anymore. Let's also make sure that our page is still rendered correctly. And yes, we can see the tabs rendered correctly. Now let me fast forward this video where I have added the snippets for all of the remaining section of this page. I have also added the corresponding includes to render all of the markdown snippets. Now let's serve the site to see the final result. All of our tabs are now rendered nicely, which makes it much easier to navigate this page. Thank you for watching this video.